Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We're very honored to have Dr. Rabia Latif Khan, who's just graduated from SOAS with a PhD. We will hopefully hear more about her dissertation, her work, and her expertise. Over to you. Welcome.
Thank you for the introduction, Assiya John. So before starting my presentation, I think it's important to just explain my research background. So to inform the audience why I focus specifically on the Hazara community today for my presentation. So my doctoral research looks at Hazara ethnic consciousness and Hazara historiography. I look at personal shifts of within Hazara identity among British Hazaras and the online Hazara History Project, which takes as its focal point the insurrection of Hazarajat in the late 1800s and the contemporary gains of Hazaras post-2001 in Afghanistan. That's why for this presentation, I will be looking at the themes of resilience and overcoming among the transnational Hazara community, given that it relates to my PhD research. So now what I'll do is I will share my screen and my slides with the audience and then start my presentation. So civic gains and accomplishments among Hazaras since 2001 are now ample and widely documented and disseminated through the internet and social media. Examples of well-known Hazara accomplishments in Afghanistan since the fall of the Taliban regime include sportsman Rohela Nikpai winning the country's first Olympic medal at the Beijing Olympics in 2008, human rights activist Dr. Seema Somar becoming the first chairperson of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission, and singer Zarhal Ilham being the first female contestant to win the popular music TV show Afghan Star in the show's history in March 2019. These gains also link to the shift in Hazara consciousness that Dr. Nematullah Ibrahimi refers to in his work on Hazara ethnic consciousness, which has dramatically altered the self-perception of the Hazara community and has led to a growth in ethnic consciousness, stemming considerably from Abdul Ali Mazari and other Hezbi Wadat Unity Party members in the 1980s and 1990s. Ibrahimi also notes that the Hazaras more generally offer the most potent example of a shift from violent conflict towards peaceful and civilian politics, and as a result are one of the success stories of post-2001 Afghanistan. Here it is also worth noting some statistics from the annual Afghanistan survey conducted by the Asia Foundation in 2018. The first Afghanistan survey was conducted in 2004, and the Asia Foundation is a non-profit international development organization committed to improving lives across a dynamic and developing Asia. Opinions of Afghans on a variety of topics from all 34 provinces of the country were analyzed as part of the survey, representing the country's diverse ethnic groups. Multiple topics were assessed within the survey, including security, governance, and migration, with numerous statistics being provided about the perceptions of Afghans on these topics. In terms of voting, the survey found that 95.4% of respondents in the Hazara-dominated Hazarajat region stated that they planned to vote in the 2019 presidential elections. The survey also noted that Hazaras are more likely to support women's voting rights, which was at 92.9% in 2017 and 96.8% in 2018, which was higher than other ethnic groups surveyed. While in terms of employment, it was mentioned that Hazaras are significantly more likely than Tajiks, Pashtuns, or Uzbeks to strongly agree with women working at NGOs, and Hazaras are also more likely or somewhat agree with women working in the army/police. These are just a handful of statistics chosen from the survey to illustrate how the shift in community circumstances among Hazaras in the last 2 decades relate to how the community perceives issues such as voting, women's rights, and education. While doctoral researcher Fazana Marie notes that education is being utilized by Hazaras as a means to resist against systematic and ethnic and religious discrimination, Marie also adds that education was still being pursued by Hazaras when the Taliban were gaining control of vast parts of Afghanistan in the 1990s, with a co-education university being established in Bamiyan in 1997. Marie states that one of the founders of this university was a woman, as well as mentioning that the first female governor of an Afghan province was Hazara, Dr. Habiba Sarabi. This increasing trend of acquiring educational opportunities among the community was also noted in the early 2000s by Professor Robert Canfield, who mentions the following correspondence with Hazara acquaintances. One feature of the Hazara community that augurs well for their future is their avowed emphasis on education. As an educated Hazara wrote to me in 2001, this is probably where Hazaras are currently distinguishing themselves. There are more schools, probably in the mountains today, than ever, and if what we hear is correct, it may be the only place, technically under Taliban control, that still has girls going to school. Beginning under the communists, Hazaras in particular saw education as a way off the bottom rung of the social ladder, and their pursuit of it has only become stronger in recent years. Resources are meager, but funds are raised both locally and internationally. These are mostly independent type schools. Curriculum is not like Sunni madrasas, but much wider, a point that even Iranian schools pride themselves on, including in English and computers. According to another educated Hazara, even before the Taliban appeared, a university had begun via some relationship with the University of Balkh in Mazar-e-Sharif. Those involved were Hazaras from Kabul who had fled to Mazar. Also in the mountains, schools have actually multiplied and may have been the only place where girls were attending classes. All are locally supported. The pursuit of education among Hazaras has been referenced in interviews for my doctoral research with Hazaras in London, Birmingham, and Nottingham to show that Hazaras are a progressive collective, a term used by my research participants themselves, with an emphasis on the fact that women from the community are also pursuing education. In an article by Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, published in November 2018 on Taliban attacks in the Hazara-populated Jaghori district of Ghazni province, this trend among Hazaras was also noted, as the piece stated that, in Jaghori, for example, there is near universal girls' education, and the number of boys attending school is higher than the national average. Hazara achievements in education were also mentioned in a 2010 article by the New York Times, which said that the Hazara gains have already been rapid. Two Hazara-dominated provinces, Bamiyan and Daikundi, have the highest passing rates on admissions exams for the country's top rung of universities, according to officials from the Ministry of Higher Education. In the high school graduating class of 2008, 3/4 of students in Daikundi who took the test passed, and 2/3 in Bamiyan, compared with the national rate of 22%. Similarly, this is also referred to by Dr. Naimatullah Ibrahimi, who mentions that the scale of transformation among Hazaras is often captured by Western newspaper headlines such as Afghanistan's success story, the liberated Hazara minority, Afghanistan's Hazaras coming up from the bottom, and the Hazara hustle to the head of class in Afghanistan. Some of my research participants also affirmed the importance of education among the community, with one research participant who is based in Birmingham and in his late 20s stating that, I guess the Hazaras are moving in that direction, studying and education. As you can see in Afghanistan, the Hazara community is working very hard. I think the fact that they were oppressed, and a lot of people look at the past and see that we were oppressed, and they use that as a sort of sense of motivation to work harder than others. I think they're generally really talented people. While another research participant who is based in Nottingham and in his 40s noted that Hazaras are development-orientated people, and they are progressive people. I mean, they wanted to have progression from 100 years ago, but they were systematically deprived of that. And that's why, so usually, the Hazaras were looking to other channels to go forward. This is starkly illustrated by the example of Shamsia Alizada, who topped the National University Entrance Exam, the Cancor, last September. Shamsia survived a 2018 attack on an education center in the predominantly Hazara district of Barchi in West Kabul, and her educational achievement gained international news coverage as well, with the Voice of America writing that Alizada was attending a tutoring academy in Kabul when a suicide bomber in August 2018 stormed the lecture hall and detonated explosives strapped to his body. The ensuing blast, claimed by the Afghan branch of Islamic State, killed at least 40 students and wounded many more. And the article also noted that Shamsia wants to become a doctor so she can bring change and serve Afghanistan. Here it is also worthwhile to note diaspora responses to educational achievements among the community and community activism more broadly. One case to consider here is an incident which took place in 2018. It relates to an image which went viral on Hazara social media. The image was of a Hazara lady, Jahantab Ahmadi, which was also broadcast by the BBC, CNN, and Al Jazeera, as well as other international news outlets. An image of Jahantab was widely circulated, which showed her nursing her 2-month-old baby while sitting on the floor at an outdoor examination, which was the university entrance exam, and she had travelled on foot for several hours to take the exam. Hazara social media shared her image with captions denoting how Hazaras value education, women's rights, and how Jahantab demonstrates the community's resolve to succeed. Furthermore, in an article by The Telegraph about Jahantab's viral photo, it was noted that Mrs. Ahmadi's story has resonated with social media users across the country who have praised the determination to be educated and cited the following as an example. You are a true world champion. You have shown that a Hazara girl can do anything in any conditions or circumstances, Nazar Hussain Akbari wrote on Facebook, referring to the fact that Mrs. Ahmadi is part of the persecuted Hazara ethnic group. With the photo of Mrs. Ahmadi having gone viral on Hazara social media, there was even a Jahantab hashtag on Twitter in March 2018, which people were using to tweet about Jahantab, and with some tweets congratulating her for her fortitude and wishing her greater success in the future. While in relation to community mobilization, through the use of social media, an online fundraising page was set up and circulated by the UK-based Afghan Youth Association in the days that followed the circulation of the image, and £10,000 was raised for Jahantab in 3 days, as she had passed her entrance exam but could not afford to pay the university fees, with CNN also mentioning that an online donation site had been set up to assist Jahantab. So Jahantab's story, which on a personal level was one of overcoming personal struggles and determination, became part of a wider narrative among the Hazara community to show that despite the adversity that individuals, Hazaras, and the community more generally endure, the resolve to access and seek education is widespread among the community. This example is also central to how the community is seeking to alter its individual and collective future in contemporary Afghanistan, principally through utilizing education, and this is also evident in the diaspora. Another key example of community engagement to consider here is the Hazara community response to the Australian bushfires of 2019 and 2020. In January 2020, several Australian news articles mentioned the Hazara community's response to the bushfires that had been ravaging the country for several months. These articles detailed how this refugee community from Afghanistan had been engaged in multiple donation campaigns across the country in their local Hazara communities. In several of these articles, Hazara community members who had been central to the fundraising efforts were interviewed. An SBS article reported that the Khatib Hazara Association, a large Sydney-based community organisation, was among the first groups to raise in excess of $18,000 for the New South Wales Rural Fire Service in mid-December, while in an article published by the ABC, particular focus was given to a young Hazara community member, Murtaza Hussain, who at the time of the report was 11 years old and had donated just over $200 to the bushfire appeal, which amounted to all the pocket money he had accumulated since moving to Australia at the age of 4 as a refugee. In this article, it was noted that Murtaza had lost his mother and older brother at a young age in a terrorist attack, and in turn, his personal trauma helped instill a strong sense of compassion within Murtaza. While an article published by the Australia-based Settlement Services International organisation mentioned that Hazara communities across the country had raised over $100,000 for the Australian bushfire appeal. An overarching theme of these articles on the Hazara community's response to the Australian bushfires was how reference was made to the suffering that these Hazara community members had themselves gone through, either on an individual level or more general terms, and how as a community which has endured so much hardship and loss, Australian Hazaras could directly relate to the plight of Australians suffering due to the bushfires. Hence the heartfelt community response to the catastrophe, which saw multiple articles written to highlight the Hazara community's generosity towards their co-nationals. The stories relayed in these news articles intertwine both the themes of resilience and overcoming, as the violence of the past, both underscored by personal and collective memories, have become the impetus for the community to work to assist their co-nationals. In one article published by SBS, the focus was on a Hazara resident of Western Sydney, Arif Nabizada, and his efforts to fundraise for the bushfire appeal. The article itself was titled, "I'm helping the bushfire appeal because I know what it's like to lose everything," with Arif further noting that we came from a fire zone country. That fire was in terms of bullets and guns and suicide attacks. Here it's a physical fire, but we know the pain of the people who lost their properties. while Australia Labour Party MP Zoe Bettison, in a parliamentary speech from February 2020, thanked the Hazara community of South Australia for their fundraising effort, noting that the community saw it as their duty to stand with their Australian brothers and sisters during such a difficult time. In turn, the charitable acts undertaken by the community show that, in spite of their past difficulties, the Hazara community in Australia has been able to rebuild itself since seeking refuge in the country, and as a result, are now seen as exemplary citizens among their wider community. I will take a slight departure here from discussing Hazara community gains to examine the positive affirmation of Hazara identity since 2001, which is itself predicated on the civic gains and community achievements of Hazaras in Afghanistan since 2001, which I think is an interesting issue to consider as well. I'll start by discussing a community cultural event that I attended during the course of my field research, as it relates to the newfound confidence of the community, not only in Afghanistan, but also in diasporic spaces, taking shape in the last 2 decades. This specific event was a Nauru celebration, which was held in the town of Burton-upon-Trent, which is located approximately 30 miles outside of Birmingham. The Burton Nauru's event took place in March 2018 and was organized by the town's local Afghan Hazara community. At this Persian New Year gathering, Hazara women and girls were dressed in traditional Hazaragi outfits. Additionally, many men and boys at the event were wearing traditional Hazaragi hats, which commonly have diamond shapes sewn in black, orange, and purple thread, usually with a pom-pom at the front. There was also a painting of Bamiyan displayed, which showed one of the iconic statues of the Buddha from the region, as well as a Hazara boy and girl in traditional Hazaragi dress. Alongside this image, there was also a painting of women with headscarves in a mud hut cooking. A Hazara attendee at the Nauru's event explained to me that the painting depicted old traditional Hazara houses. Hazara culture was on display everywhere at this event and affirmed that a larger transnational ethnic consciousness was now manifesting among the community, where in this case, clothing, ornaments, and musical instruments were of great importance. It was also mentioned to me on multiple occasions at the gathering how there is now growing pride in asserting Hazara identity and promoting Hazara culture, which is extremely visible online on Hazara social media pages. One of my research participants who was also present at the event said to me that in the past, the trend had been for Hazara women to wear kuchi dresses to important formal events, but that in recent years, Hazara women are choosing to wear traditional Hazara outfits. Another guest at the Nauru's event also mentioned how singing in the Hazaragi dialect has become very popular in recent years, with many well-known Hazara singers choosing to sing in Hazaragi instead of standard Farsi Dari, and with more non-Hazara Afghan singers opting to do the same, such as the renowned singer Ariana Saeed. The above examples were also noted alongside a trend among some Afghan singers choosing to wear traditional Hazaragi dresses and headdresses, as has been worn by the singer Sita Qasimi on multiple occasions, who also sings in Hazaragi alongside in Pashto and Persian. Furthermore, a musician was also in attendance at the Nauru's event, and he sang old Hazara folk songs while playing a Dambara. In recent years, the Dambara has become a symbol of Hazara identity, with images online expressing Hazara culture through the use of images of Dambaras. The reason I chose to give a brief description of this particular Nauru's event is because the images, symbols, and sounds I witnessed at this event demonstrate a growth in Hazara ethnic consciousness, which stems from the gains of the community since the fall of the Taliban regime, and show how contemporary achievements are also impacting and enhancing communities, members, associations, and affiliation with their identity, which was historically seen as marginal. Here it's important to also briefly discuss a recently established cultural event, which also relates to how the Hazara community seeks to position itself on the international stage post-2001. In relation to this new positioning of the community, the Bamiyan Dambara Festival is an interesting case study. The Bamiyan Dambara Festival began in Bamiyan in 2017 and was initially promoted online by the Bamiyan Cultural Center. This cultural festival has been covered by Tolo News, Hama Press, and Voice of America Dari. Online, the Bamiyan Dambara Festival has been used as a means to promote Hazara culture, with many images of the event being circulated on Hazara social media pages. The festival is also used to highlight that contemporary Hazaras espouse liberal ideals, with some comments online claiming that regions populated by Hazaras, like Bamiyan, are the only places where one would see such a music festival taking place, with no segregation of male and female performers, no compulsion in veiling, and when no threats of violence would manifest. Furthermore, the festival is itself now an example of a motivating and inspiring community event, which has now become entrenched within the Hazara community. In terms of how the Hazara community chooses to present itself online in relation to such cultural events and other community initiatives, it is also worthwhile to briefly explore the Dambara in relation to Hazara identity, given the development of individual and shared articulations of Hazara identity since the collective gains of the community from 2001. The shift which has occurred among the community since the initial proliferation of Hazara consciousness in the late 1980s and again since 2001 has seen the Dambara as a central pillar of Hazara community events, Hazara culture, and Hazara identity. The Dambara as a symbol of Hazara identity was discussed in a journal paper by Dr. Ali Karimi titled Medium of the Oppressed, Folk Music, Forced Migration and Tactical Media. Karimi mentions how a revered Hazara singer, Sarwa Sarkosh, would make reference to the Dambara in his songs in the 1970s and 80s, as well as that in Quetta, Hazara Dambara folk music was popular at the time and was one of the last remnants of Hazara identity. Karimi notes that the Dambara was not always seen as a positive element of Hazara culture and identity, and was previously shunned by the community, as he notes that oral poetry and folk singing was common among Hazaras, but they maintained a negative view of instrumental music, considering it un-Islamic, and that the journey of Dambara music from a stigmatized un-Islamic practice to a proud symbol of ethnic identity was long and rough. A fascinating parallel can be seen here between the Dambara and Hazara ethnic consciousness, in that the instrument, which is now seen as a symbol of Hazara identity, was previously viewed negatively by the community, much in the same way that a culture of self-loathing permeated within the community in relation to an ethnic Hazara identity, which was also seen negatively given the Hazara community's historic subjugation and prior lower socioeconomic status, both of which have reversed with time and are now seen positively within the community and are promoted. This is similarly highlighted by Karimi, who states that today, Dambara music is not only socially acceptable among the Hazaras, but it has also become a popular symbol of Hazara identity. The journey of Dambara music from a stigmatized un-Islamic practice to a proud symbol of ethnic identity was long and rough. It was in a certain way similar to the journey of Hazaras themselves, from a voiceless, invisible, excluded community to one that, despite continuous persecution by state and non-state groups, has been increasingly visible in Afghan politics and culture. This shift in internal perceptions of being Hazara among the community and overcoming more generally were also highlighted in many of my research interviews, with one interviewee who is based in Nottingham and in his 20s stating that being Hazara in Afghanistan, it differs. I will tell you from two perspectives, back in the day historically and then today. So being a Hazara back in the day was people who would do menial jobs for the very low level of the community, people who were not labeled as proper human beings, only as laborers, that they could just do labor, like the Black community back in the day in American history. And now calling as a Hazara, right now if I say I'm a Hazara, I'm a person that is more into knowledge, which is more into going far and wanting to become something. I just want to improve myself, I want to improve my community, and want to become something that can bring pride into Afghanistan. Now, if you're a Hazara, people really respect you. People say we are the community that brings light in the face of Afghanistan to the world. He additionally added that, so now if you go back to Afghanistan, you can see all the sportsmen who bring the gold medals are Hazaras. We have even got a system called Kankor system, which means that there are like 15 to 20 public universities, and you can't go there unless you have the top marks. It's an examination that takes place every year. And you know the top person? The person who takes the top score every year is Hazara. And especially the women's rights in Afghanistan. The Human Rights Commission is run by a Hazara, Dr. Seema Samar. If you are Hazara right now, Afghan people say that these people are modern, educated, have a worldly perspective, and they respect you for that. And that is how we overcame our past. So to conclude, it can be seen that since the fall of the Taliban regime in 2001, the Hazara community has made great strides in many fields, both for the betterment of their community and country, namely in relation to education, sports, and politics. This has also impacted diaspora activism and community engagement. And these community gains have meant that the community in Afghanistan and the diaspora is now working to showcase their culture and achievements with larger audiences. This is most effectively being done through social media. Lastly, these civic gains are now positively impacting how the community perceives what it means to be Hazara and Hazara identity more broadly. Thank you.
Amazing. Yes, lots there to ask you more. I mean, you touched on so many different areas that, you created a whole picture of the Hazara community in Afghanistan and outside. And in terms of the current situation, it's even more important to actually acknowledge and sort of understand what has happened in the past and what is happening right now. If I would want you to sort of explain as to what you think might be the next step for the Hazara community, but then also in terms of actually how would they actually see themselves within the next 10 years inside Afghanistan?
Thank you so much. That's a really important and interesting question. So based on my work and research with Hazaras, one thing that's come up quite a lot is that there have been quite a lot of collective gains in Afghanistan in the diaspora, but a big issue that affects Hazaras in Afghanistan and Afghans of all ethnicities in Afghanistan is unfortunately the continued violence and instability. So a big fear for Hazaras is right now, you even see a lot of news articles which are focusing on Hazaras given their status as a religious minority in the Afghan context, is the worry about what the Afghan peace, what the peace deal with the Taliban would mean for their community and the collective gains of Afghans, because they really worry that, we've made these great achievements specifically in education and women's rights. But, if the Taliban is not willing to understand that we live in a pluralistic society where people have different interpretations of Islam and thoughts about women's place in society now, not how they perceived it, 20, 30 years ago, then the real worry is that in the next 10 years is that God forbid, there could be a reversal of these gains for society as a whole, not just Hazaras, because, women are working in many sectors now. You can see, and there's so many articles about women's empowerment in Kabul and so many achievements there. So the biggest thing that I hear through friends and even in my research interviews is that the gains that we see in education is most likely going to continue. But, if the Taliban get greater power or leverage, then that there'll be a huge reversal there. And for women, all Afghan women, sadly, not just the Hazara community.
Right. And what other predictions have you got?
Oh, I don't have many predictions per se myself. I feel like I'm more informed by those who have a direct connection to Afghanistan. But from what's been said to me, I really hope in terms of the progress and the gains that have been made that they can be maintained. But the worry that again is said to me a lot is about how much can be maintained in the future if the power dynamics change, given these peace deals that are happening. So I hope it's not true, but a worry is that if there is a power sharing with the Taliban and the Taliban are very rigid and not willing to kind of change their worldview, then that unfortunately things can take a few steps back in terms of the gains for society more generally, which I really hope doesn't happen. But unfortunately, given the kind of leverage that the Taliban kind of have right now, with America wanting to leave as soon as possible, it unfortunately does seem like the cards are in their hands.
Right. I mean, there are various other sort of issues that needs to be addressed at this point. But of course, throughout the last few years, I mean, decades, the community, the Afghan community as a whole has made lots of progress. And let's hope actually, all the people of Afghanistan sort of, find each other, reunite, rather than divide, because at the moment with your presentation, I mean, it is really great to see the progress that they have made. But I personally, got the picture as if they have also created a division in a dividing line between themselves as a separate community and not being attached to the rest of the Afghan people in Afghanistan and other ethnic groups?
Okay, so that's an interesting perspective. Again, I feel I can't generalize about Hazaras when it comes to this issue. There is a nuance when it comes to that issue. Unfortunately, given the historic circumstances of Hazaras in Afghanistan and even discrimination that some of my research participants experienced in the 1990s and early 2000s growing up in Afghanistan, there is a bit of this belief that there needs to be a spousal or assertion of Hazara identity because it was historically stigmatized, and people were, even Hazaras themselves, were so ashamed to be Hazara. So they want to reverse that and say there's no shame or anything wrong with being Hazara. It's just as equal as any of the other ethnic groups in Afghanistan. So a lot of that comes from that. It's not a case of wanting to separate, because a lot of my research participants, they had a hyphenated identity of being Afghan and Hazara, and there was a lot of pride in this national identity as Afghan because of it represents such a diverse and unique country. So there's a strong attachment to that identity. But the espousal of Hazara identity or Hazara culture comes from a place of because of something being historically denied by the leadership and then by society at large because of the community's very low socioeconomic status. So it's about affirmation because of the fact that historically it was something that was denied, as opposed to it being something kind of more confrontational or wanting to say that other identities don't matter or other communities don't matter. In my own research, it was never framed in such a way.
Thank you. No, of course, this was more to get clarification. The question was posed in order to get sort of your response in that direction. And I totally acknowledge and agree, whichever ethnic community from within the Afghan community makes progress, it ends up turning into, making a positive image or creating a positive image for Afghanistan itself. I mean, whether it's the Pashtuns or Tajiks or Hazara, they're all from Afghanistan. And this is the uniqueness that we have as a country altogether. Now, I mean, there are many young people who have actually graduated and they have got so much knowledge, so much expertise, and there's so much within each one of them, so much energy. And I just hope that they actually get together and sort of, build Afghanistan as unique as it was amongst all the other countries that we know. Multiculturalism existed in Afghanistan even before World War I. And this is something which, if we don't actually get united, and if all the ethnic groups do not actually get united, that is lost. Multiculturalism includes every single human being in Afghanistan, and that's the beauty that Afghanistan has. And the Hazara community, of course, have made amazing progress, and they should be maybe also regarded as a model of a model community, to say that they have made it. Why not the rest? So everyone should actually learn from each other, and I'm pretty sure that with your expertise and your knowledge that you have gained now, you actually raise awareness about this uniqueness.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think what you've said about the multiculturalism and the diversity, just as someone who's mainly been educated and learned through Afghanistan in the last few years, it's something that as someone from outside and who's just a researcher, I've really been blown away by, because it's just something we don't really hear about in the Western context. Unfortunately, the perception and what we know about Afghanistan is generally, sadly, very is negative. It's not to ignore the war and the suffering. Obviously, that is a lived reality, but there's so much more to Afghanistan than that. Things like the Zoroastrian and Buddhist history of Afghanistan. The average person in Europe will have no clue about that. The fact that there are Afghan Hindus and Sikhs, people don't know about that. So it's like you're saying, it's something so beautiful about the country. And like you're saying, the youth in Afghanistan is very educated, but unfortunately, you know, it's about what they can do with their education if they don't have the opportunity. So hopefully they will be the generation who can bring change. And if there have been divisions in the past, they can really heal and work together and move forward. So I feel positively about how they will perceive this multiculturalism and what it means to be Afghan, definitely.
No, thank you. It's great talking to you as well. Can I ask you a personal question?
Yes, sure.
How came about that you decided to research the Hazara community, and where do you come from?
Yeah, sure. So actually my story is not very interesting when people ask me. I was as an undergraduate student, I was studying law, and a lot of the students were very interested in learning whether the kind of war in Iraq was legal or illegal. And some of the professors could answer that question, but they didn't seem to know anything about Afghanistan and, you know, what was going on there. So that really, I was very curious about that. I found that very confusing, that a war that happened 1 year before Iraq, nobody seemed to answer any questions about. So I started to I just felt like it was always on the kind of outskirts of any discussion. So I just got very curious, started reading about Afghanistan. I really knew nothing other than the capital was Kabul. So just to read, you know, even just to read the ethnic diversity, I had no idea that you have, you know, Tajiks and Uzbeks and Turkmens in the country. That really, you know, was so fascinating to me. And then to learn about the so-called, Mongol Shias of Afghanistan, which is the kind of historically the labels ascribed to Hazaras, which is a bit more contentious now. But at the time when I didn't know anything, I was very taken aback by that. So I was very curious to know how just in the center of Afghanistan, there seemed to be this closed off Shia community that was supposedly had a connection to East Asia. So that really fascinated me. So it was just that really just started reading and unfortunately got aware of the fact that at that time there were a lot of targeted attacks against Hazaras in a city called Quetta, and then just got acquainted with Hazaras in London and started to get educated more that way. So the more I met with the community and got to know people, I just found them very open and warm and welcoming and willing to answer my silly questions. So through that, I decided I'd really like to work with the community more. And in terms of my background, so I was born in the UK, but my parents were born in Kashmir in a region called Punch. But that's my academic interest has been the Afghan diaspora.
There's one thing for sure: whoever gets engaged with Afghanistan will not leave without getting immersed. And surely you have to immerse yourself.
True. That's 100%. The more and more I read, the more I fall in love with the place. So I 100% agree.
Have you ever been to Afghanistan?
No, I that's my dream. Love to go to Bamiyan, Badakhshan, and that's the dream.
Well, all I can say is it's the most beautiful country that you can experience. It's an unfortunate thing that for over 3 years now, war has damaged the place, but nevertheless, it lives and it will live forever in the minds and the work of yours and many others to come. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for your interest in participating in the initiation of the Peace Center in the name of Afghanistan, and we look very much forward to collaborating more with yourself and others to sort of join us in this task to establish something in the name of Afghanistan and the Afghan people.
Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure for me to join you today, and all the best with the ongoing initiative. And I'll be really happy to help in any way I can.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rabia.